A road through northern British Columbia became known not for where it led, but for who vanished along it. Women and girls disappeared, families searched for decades, and a country was forced to confront the terrifying truth behind the Highway of Tears.
What you are about to hear is believed to be real, based on witness accounts, testimonies, and public record. This is terrifying and true.
It's a lonely road through the mountains of northern British Columbia. By day, Highway 16 can seem beautiful. By night, it becomes something else entirely. A ribbon of darkness between towns, forests, and long stretches where help may be miles away. For decades, women and girls vanished along this route. Some were found murdered. Some were never found at all. Many were Indigenous. Many had families who begged for answers while the world looked away. Was there one predator stalking the highway? Were there many? Or was the true danger larger than any single killer? Tonight we travel the Highway of Tears, where the road is not haunted by legend, but by the very real names of those who never returned home. Highway 16 doesn't look evil. It cuts through northern British Columbia in a long ribbon of asphalt running between mountain walls, black spruce, rivers, logging roads, small towns, and places where the night can feel so massive it swallows the headlights whole. In daylight, it can be beautiful in the way remote places are. Blue distance, cold air, forest pressing close. The sense that civilization is only borrowing space from the wilderness. But after dark, beauty changes shape. The road becomes emptier. The shoulders become narrower. The passing trucks become events. A gas station can be miles away. A house can be farther. A phone can be useless. And for many women and girls in the communities along this route, especially Indigenous women and girls, the highway was never just a road. It was how you got to school, to work, how you visited family, reached a doctor, how you left one town for another when there was no car in the driveway, no bus coming soon, and no safe option except the dangerous one everybody already understood. So, people hitchhiked. They stood beside the road with backpacks, purses, jackets pulled tight against the weather, trusting that the next vehicle would take them where they needed to go. Some made it, others vanished, and yet still more were found later in ditches, gravel pits, wooded areas, and places known first to families, then to police, then to a country that took far too long to listen. The name Highway of Tears was born from grief. Families and advocates used it because there were too many mothers crying, too many sisters searching, too many daughters whose names became warnings along a route that should have been ordinary. Officially, the RCMP's Project E-Pana came to include 18 cases across a wider network of British Columbia highways, 13 homicides, and 5 disappearances. But families and Indigenous organizations have long argued the true number is higher. The exact count depends on geography, criteria, and which deaths were included. The pain, however, does not. Because the most frightening thing about the Highway of Tears is not the idea of one shadowy predator waiting in the dark. It's the possibility of many predators, many failures, many warnings, and a road where, for decades, too many women seemed to disappear into the space between one town and the next. To understand the Highway of Tears, start with the road itself. Highway 16, also known as the Yellowhead Highway, stretches across northern British Columbia. The section most commonly associated with the Highway of Tears runs roughly 720 kilometers between Prince George and Prince Rupert, though police investigations eventually widened beyond that corridor to include other major routes, including parts of Highway 97 and Highway 5. On a map, it looks simple, a line connecting communities. In real life, it is distance, weather, poverty, isolation, and silence. Northern British Columbia is not built like a dense urban corridor where a missed bus means waiting 10 minutes. Communities can be separated by long stretches of forest and mountain. Public transit was limited for years. Many people did not own vehicles. Cell service was incomplete, to say the least. Some communities had few local services, which meant travel was not optional. People traveled for work, medical appointments, school, court, groceries, family, safety, and survival. That is one of the first misconceptions to correct. Hitchhiking along the Highway of Tears was not always a reckless adventure. For many people, it was transportation after other systems had failed. If you had no car, no money for a private ride, and no reliable bus, the highway became the only route through the problem. A thumb went out, a car slowed, a decision was made in a matter of seconds. And for women and girls, that decision could become fatal. The cases stretch back decades. In 1969, 26-year-old Gloria Moody, a First Nations woman, was found dead after she was last seen in Williams Lake. In 1974, Colleen McMillan disappeared while hitchhiking near Lackahatchee. Her murder would not be solved until decades later through DNA. In 1978, 12-year-old Monica Jack vanished while riding her bike near Merritt. Her remains were found in 1995. Many years later, Gary Handlin was convicted in her death. Those cases are important. Those cases show something important. The Highway of Tears is often spoken of as one mystery, but it's really not the case. It's a constellation of mysteries across years, towns, circumstances, and investigative outcomes. Some were murdered, some disappeared, some were children, others were adults, Many were hitchhiking. Many were simply traveling. A few cases eventually saw convictions, and many did not. That is why the phrase can be both useful and dangerous. It gives a name to a pattern families had been screaming about for years, but a single name can make listeners imagine a single explanation. One killer, one truck, one face in the window. The terror here is larger than that. A long, isolated transportation corridor created opportunity again and again, and vulnerable women and girls were left to navigate it with too little protection. By the late 1980s and 1990s, the list of names had grown heavier. Alberta Williams, 24, disappeared in 1989 after leaving a pub in Prince Rupert. Her body was found days later. Delphine Nicol, only 16, vanished in 1990 near Smithers. Ramona Wilson disappeared in 1994 after leaving Smithers for a gathering. Her remains were found the following year. Roxanne Thiara and Alicia Germain were also found murdered in 1994. Lana Derrick, 19, disappeared in 1995 after being seen at a gas station in Thornhill. Each name had a family. Each disappearance began with ordinary details. A plan, a ride, a night out, a place to go. That's what makes these stories so hard to bear. They don't begin like horror stories. They begin like errands, like visits, like teenage plans, like someone trying to get from point A to point B. Then the road seemingly takes over. For families, the first hours were confusion. Maybe she missed the ride. Maybe she stayed with a friend. Maybe she'll call tomorrow. Then, tomorrow becomes another day. Another phone call. Another search. Another police report. Another rumor from someone who thinks they saw something. The family starts driving the same roads, checking pullouts, ditches, trails, riverbanks, and logging roads. Every bend becomes a possibility. Every piece of clothing becomes a reason to stop. And around them, the world keeps moving. Trucks still pass. Snow still falls. The river still runs. The forest closes around whatever it knows. There is no agreed-upon victim count. The RCMP's Project Ipana officially includes those 18 cases referenced. But Indigenous organizations, families, and advocates often use larger numbers because they include a wider geography, more years, and cases that don't fit the police task force's narrower criteria. The uncertainty itself is part of the story. Even counting the victims has been contested. By the early 2000s, the crisis was impossible to dismiss, but still too easy for outsiders to misunderstand. When Nicole Hoare, a 25-year-old white woman from Alberta, disappeared in 2002 while hitchhiking from Prince George toward Smithers, her case received significant media attention. Families of Indigenous victims noticed the difference. It was not that Nicole deserved less attention. She deserved every bit of it. The question was, why so many Indigenous women and girls had not received the same urgency before. That question cuts through the entire Highway of Tears. Who gets searched for with publicity? Who gets believed quickly? Who becomes a national headline? Who becomes a whisper along the shoulder? In 2005, Tamara Chipman, 22, was last seen hitchhiking near Prince Rupert. In 2006, 14-year-old Ayla Sarik Auger disappeared in Prince George. Her body was found near Highway 16. That same period brought mounting pressure from families and communities who had carried grief for years, while official answers remained painfully few. Finally, police attention consolidated into something larger. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police created Project Ipana, as mentioned before, to examine whether a serial killer or multiple killers might be responsible for the murders and disappearances of women traveling along major highways in British Columbia. The task force first took on 9 investigations in 2006. In 2007, the number doubled to 18. But for many families, the creation of a task force did not feel like the beginning of justice. It felt like a late admission, a recognition that the road had been speaking for decades, and too many people had refused to hear it. Often in true crime, we look for the moment when the pattern becomes obvious. A map fills up with pins, a detective connects names, a reporter writes a phrase that sticks. The public finally sees what families had seen all along. But the Highway of Tears did not become visible all at once. Only through vigils, memorial walks, posters, missing person notices, family pressure, Indigenous organizing, local reporting, and the work of people who refused to let the road remain a place of private grief. The name itself is often traced to a 1998 vigil in Terrace, where Florence Naziel used the phrase while thinking of the tears of families whose loved ones had vanished or been found murdered. It's an important distinction. The name did not come from a marketing campaign or a television show. It came from mourning. Families were not asking for legend. They were asking for attention. The 2006 Highway of Tears Symposium brought families, Indigenous leaders, community organizations, and advocates together to demand practical change. The recommendations were not vague. They called for better victim family support, improved transportation, safer emergency communication, prevention programs, community coordination, and more accountable policing. For years, signs along the highway warned that a killer was on the loose and told girls not to hitchhike. The signs were stark, memorable, and chilling. But to many families, they also carried an ugly implication. If you vanish after hitchhiking, you were warned. That isn't the same as protection. Human Rights Watch later documented concerns from Indigenous women and girls in northern British Columbia, including failures of police protection and allegations of abusive policing. The report, published in 2013, did not claim that every officer or every investigation was the same, but it did show why trust was broken. If people fear the institution that is supposed to protect them, they may hesitate to report danger, cooperate with investigations, or ask for help before a situation becomes life or death. That distrust did not appear from nowhere. It grew from history, colonial violence, residential schools, child welfare removals, Poverty and repeated experiences of Indigenous women being treated as less credible, less urgent, or less worthy of protection. This is where the Highway of Tears becomes larger than any single crime scene. The road was dangerous because predators used it, but it was also dangerous because systems around the road left people exposed. Consider the simple act of waiting beside the road. A woman needs to get from one community to another. Maybe the trip is short by highway standards and impossible by foot. There is no car available. The bus isn't there. Cell phone service may be poor or non-existent. She accepts a ride. Inside the vehicle, the rules change. The driver controls the doors, the speed, the direction, the turnoff. A safe ride looks exactly like a dangerous one until it's too late. While that is cinematic terror, it's also practical terror. It's not a ghost story. It's the fear of being trapped inside someone else's moving vehicle while the forest slides past the windows. And the forest is enormous. The terrain along and around these highways can make searches brutal. There are logging roads, river systems, brush, snow, ravines, and remote pullouts. A body can be moved. Evidence can be exposed to weather. Witnesses may be scarce. Memories fade. A vehicle description becomes uncertain. A timeline becomes thin. A rumor becomes the only thing a family has to follow. That uncertainty feeds the legend. People imagine a killer moving confidently through the dark, knowing exactly where to stop, where to turn, where no one will see. Maybe sometimes that was true, but what we know is more chilling because it's less simple. The cases are spread across years and places. Some have different suspects. Some have been solved or partly answered. Others remain open. There may not be one villain behind the curtain. There may be many ordinary-looking suspects, many missed chances, many nights when danger passed through a community and left no name behind. Families had to live inside that possibility. They also had to fight the language used around their loved ones. Too often, missing and murdered Indigenous women were described through risk factors before they were described as people. A woman might be called a hitchhiker, a runaway, a sex worker, troubled, transient, or high risk, and the label could flatten her humanity. The memorial walks, vigils, websites, and public campaigns are not only about solving crimes, they're about restoring personhood, saying names, showing faces, telling the world that these were daughters, sisters, mothers, aunties, friends, students, workers, women who made plans. The highway tried to turn them into cases. Their families kept turning them back into people. Project E-Pana sounds on paper like the moment the system finally focused. A task force, a case list, a mandate. Investigators assigned to look for links between murders and disappearances along this cruel stretch of highway. The question was direct. Was there a serial killer? Or were there multiple killers using the same conditions? The answer has never been simple. Some cases connected to the broader Highway of Tears story have seen movement. Colleen Macmillan's 1974 murder was linked through DNA to Bobby Jack Fowler, an American man who died in prison in 2006. Monica Jack's murder led to a conviction decades after she disappeared, when Gary Handlin was found guilty in her death. Those developments prove that the past is not sealed. Evidence can survive. DNA can speak. Witnesses can come forward. A case that looks frozen can still shift. But those solved cases also sharpen the pain around the unsolved ones. For the families of Delphine Nichol, Alberta Williams, Ramona Wilson, Lena Derrick, Nicole Hoare, Tamara Chipman, Isla Sarek Auger, and others, every anniversary is a question still standing in the road. What happened? Who knows? Why did no one stop it? Some families have searched for decades. They've walked the route. They've held the signs. They've spoken to reporters. They've watched new investigations rise and fade. They've heard promises and theories. They've seen strangers become fascinated by the darkness of the story, while the practical demands remain painfully basic. Keep searching. Keep sharing information. Keep funding support. Keep the road safer. Keep treating these lives as worthy of urgency. In 2012, the Missing Women Commission of Inquiry in British Columbia examined police failures around missing and murdered women, especially in the context of the Robert Pickton case in Vancouver. Its findings about systemic bias and investigative failures echoed what many families had already been saying. Highway of Tears advocates had their own recommendations too, and again, the same themes returned. Transportation, communication, police accountability, community safety, and family support. Progress came slowly. A subsidized bus service along parts of Highway 16 began in 2017 after years of advocacy. That may sound small if you live somewhere with constant transit. Along this corridor, it wasn't small at all. It meant another option besides standing on the shoulder and hoping the right vehicle stopped. Cell service became another measure of belated safety. The 2006 symposium recommendations called for improved emergency communication along the corridor. For years, there were major gaps. In 2021, governments announced funding for cellular expansion. In late 2024, Rogers announced that 5 new towers had gone live, with 9 of the 11 then in service, covering about 166 kilometers of previous gaps and moving toward continuous coverage along the route. That is good news, but it's also haunting, because the recommendation was nearly 2 decades old. For the families, progress can feel like standing in 2 times at once. In the present, a tower goes up, a bus route runs, a politician calls it a milestone. A company calls it connectivity. Officials say safety has improved. In the past, a girl stood by the road without those options and did not come home. The Highway of Tears also became part of Canada's larger national reckoning with missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. The National Inquiry's final report, released in 2019, included 231 calls for justice and drew from testimony by more than 2,000 family members, survivors, experts, and knowledge keepers. The scale of that work made clear that Highway 16 was one corridor in a much larger crisis. It's important to talk about how the atmosphere is only the surface. The dark highway, the empty shoulder, the headlights, the silence after a vehicle disappears around a bend. The deeper horror is the slow violence of being unheard. A family dismissed, a warning delayed, a bus missing, a phone without signal, a search that begins too late. That is not one dramatic failure. It is a structure made of small failures, repeated until they become lethal. The phrase Highway of Tears survives because it holds all of that. Not merely a nickname for Highway 16, but a record of what happens when grief has to name itself because the official language is too small. There is a temptation with a story like this to end with the unknown driver, the cold case file, the forest that will not give up its dead, the lonely road disappearing into the rain. But that ending is too easy, because the Highway of Tears is not only a mystery, it's a test of what a country does after it's already been warned. Families and advocates did not simply ask people to be sad. They asked for specific things so they could be safer. It pulls the story out of the fog. It reminds us that justice is not only a courtroom. Justice can also look like a missing persons report treated with urgency, a family liaison who calls back, a search that begins before the trail goes cold. Some of those changes have finally begun to appear. Highway 16 now has subsidized transit options that didn't exist for many years. The new cell towers we mentioned earlier have narrowed stretches where a person once couldn't call for help. Those are real, tangible improvements, and for someone traveling the corridor today, they make all the difference. But it doesn't erase the years when the recommendations sat unanswered and families kept searching. That is the present-day wound in this story. The danger is not only what happened before, it's a question of whether the response will be maintained and expanded after the headlines fade. Our rural and indigenous families believed quickly when someone disappears, are old files still being worked or merely stored? The road is still there. It still runs through extraordinary country. Mountains, rivers, forests, long winter dark, and towns where the highway is not scenery, but necessity. And along that road there are memorials, billboards, red dresses, names and stories that refuse to disappear. A disappearance tries to create absence. Families answer by creating presence. They put a face where there was a statistic. They put a name where there was a file number. They make the country look at the road and understand what happened was not inevitable. It was allowed. Not every death could have been prevented by one obvious action, Real life is not that clean, but many of the dangers were known. Families knew, communities knew, women who stood on the shoulder knew, girls who climbed into cars because they had no other ride knew. The terror was not hidden, it was visible in plain sight, mile after mile. So, when we tell this story, we shouldn't tell it like a legend about a cursed road. The road isn't cursed. The road is a witness. It witnessed the way isolation becomes danger. It witnessed how poverty narrows choices. It witnessed how a missing girl can become a rumor before she becomes a headline. It witnessed how families can carry grief longer than governments carry promises. It witnessed resistance. Every walk, every poster, every family interview, every recommendation, every renewed investigation, every working phone signal, every spoken name is a refusal to let the darkness have the final word. There is no clean ending here. Some families have seen convictions. Many have not. Some cases remain open. Some answers may still be buried in old evidence, old witness memories, or in the conscience of someone who has spent years pretending the past didn't follow them. But the story isn't over just because the road is quiet. A quiet road can still be full of voices. And on Highway 16, if you listen past the wind, past the trucks, past the tires hissing over wet pavement, you can hear what those voices have been saying for decades. Remember us, search for us, protect the living, and never mistake silence for peace. The Highway of Tears is frightening because it reminds us that a road does not have to be haunted to be full of ghosts. Terrifying and True is narrated by Enrique Couto. It's executive produced by Rob Fields and Bobbletopia.com. And produced by Dan Wilder. With original theme music by Ray Mattis. If you have a story you think we should cover on Terrifying and True, send us an email at weeklyspooky@gmail.com. And if you want to support us for as little as $1 a month, go to weeklyspooky.com/join. Your support for as little as $1 a month keeps the show going. And speaking of, I want to say an extra special thank you to our Patreon podcast boosters, folks who pay a little bit more to hear their name at the end of the show. And they are Johnny Nix, Kate and Lulu, Jessica Fuller, Mike Eschewey, Jenny Green, Amber Hansford, Karen Wiemet, Jack Kerr, and Craig Cohen. Thank you all so much, and thank you for listening. We'll see you all right here next time on Terrifying and True.